It's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients so that you can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. In last week's blog, I talked about why the doctors in intensive care are looking for a solution for their ICU and why you are looking for a solution for your critically ill loved one and how to get what you want in this power struggle. You can check out the last blog by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to talk about IntensiveCareHotline.com, why I do what I do, a story from behind the scenes. Many families in intensive care that come to IntensiveCareHotline.com come to me and they ask me why I do what I do and how I've come up with this idea of the IntensiveCareHotline.com support, advocacy, counseling and consulting website. That's only a fair question to ask, and I think it's time that I share more about what I do and why I do it. It's quite simply that when I first went into nursing in 1996, I was full of enthusiasm and I wanted to help people in need. And that's still the case. I haven't lost any of my enthusiasm. Much of it was driven by losing my uncle at the young age of 51 in intensive care after a severe cardiomyopathy in 1989. Not that I knew then what me and my family were dealing with, but it certainly shaped some views about the world I was living in. When tragedy strikes, everybody at first feels helpless and everybody is trying to clutch at straws. Maybe me wanting to become a nurse was a sign of me trying to make sense of critical illness, death, and everything else that goes along with it. However, I sensed very quickly that I was in the right profession from the early days of my nursing career. When I then first started in intensive care in 1999, I had no eyes for what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care. I was just learning the clinical ropes and I was trying to get familiar in an overwhelming environment that was not short of challenges, including many difficult personalities. I also realized that dealing with severe critical illness, dealing with death and dying, and with stressed relatives of patients wasn't an easy task for a newbie, and I once again felt very overwhelmed. As time progressed and went on, I felt more comfortable dealing with everything that was happening around me, but I was nowhere near of having embraced the environment. Fast forward, after many more years in different environments and different countries in intensive care nursing, which included all major areas and specialities of intensive care, including trauma, cardiac, neuro, general medical, surgical, pediatrics, and also intensive home care nursing, I also spent time working as a nurse unit manager in intensive care for over 5 years. Having managed 2 intensive care units was a lot of fun, but also extremely challenging. I enjoyed every minute of it, but I didn't feel the need of wanting to do this for the rest of my life. I eventually gladly went back to the bedside, which is why I went into intensive care nursing in the first place. But after I had spent a good decade in intensive care, I could also see that what you see is not always what you get, and I had learned enough to know and understand that the interests of an intensive care unit and the interests of hospital management are not often the interests of a patient and a family. In fact, I sensed that there was often a real conflict of interest. I had spent enough time in nurse, hospital and intensive care management, as well as having worked with thousands of critically ill patients and their families, to understand on a deep level how vulnerable they really felt. And I understood on a deep level what questions they asked, where intensive care units are simply not telling families of critically ill patients the truth. I also understood what questions families in intensive care don't ask, because they are worried to look stupid in front of others. And I also understood what questions families in intensive care don't even ask in the first place because they simply don't know what they don't know. I also learned that especially during incredibly challenging situations, such as where patients are very unstable and in a very critical condition, or where they are in a life-threatening situation, or where they're not waking up after an induced coma, where they're in intensive care for long-term treatments and long-term stays, including long-term mechanical ventilation, or they may be having a severe or traumatic head or brain injury, or they may be threatened with an NFR, not for resuscitation, or DNR, do not resuscitate order. Or they may be in a situation where the intensive care team suggests that a withdrawal of treatment or a limitation of treatment might be, quote unquote, in the best interest for your critically ill loved one. Or they may even be approaching their end of life in intensive care. In those situations that I just mentioned, intensive care units and intensive care teams have huge interests way beyond your critically ill loved one's diagnosis, prognosis, care, and treatment. And therefore, if you and your family are not educated around those massively challenging and often heartbreaking situations, you often stand very little chance in getting what you want, need, and deserve. In the end, I wanted to create a safe environment for families in intensive care, where any questions can be asked and you will get an honest answer. No hiding behind hidden agendas and no hiding behind "we are the experts here," which is what most intensive care teams do. And here is another quick story from the real world in intensive care so that you really understand why I do what I do, so that you get a feel for what's often really happening in intensive care. It's also a story why I eventually, quote unquote, pulled the trigger, so to speak, in making my vision a reality and have this support and resource website for families in intensive care. I was working a Sunday night shift in a very busy ICU many years back, and I was looking after this 62-year-old gentleman who fell off the roof of his house one day before on the Saturday. The 62-year-old man and his wife had just recently retired, and they were looking forward to a much quieter life, and they were looking forward to spend more time together after a busy working and family life. When I came onto the night shift and after I received handover, I realized things are not looking good, and the 62-year-old man had sustained severe intracranial bleedings, and he also sustained multiple fractures around his hips, arms, legs, and ribs. From what I've learned in ICU over the years, severe head and brain injuries tend to be some of the most challenging, unpredictable, and also volatile injuries, with sometimes a high probability of death. This man's situation wasn't any different from many other severe head and brain injuries I looked after before. His CT of the brain was catastrophic, with many areas showing bleeding into the brain, lowering the chances of a meaningful recovery and survival. Furthermore, the pressures in his brain were so high, adding on further massive stress to the brain he didn't need. It was a very busy shift trying to keep this 62-year-old gentleman's brain pressures at bay, and we were doing whatever was necessary to keep him alive. This was very much in line with what the family, mainly his wife and their 2 daughters, wanted. I didn't have too much time on this shift to talk to the family as I was very busy. However, what I realized was that this family spent all night at the bedside, hoping and praying and trying to clutch at straws. I knew that they weren't prepared for everything that was happening, especially since their life had changed literally overnight. The 62-year-old gentleman was very sick and his chances of survival were very slim. I came back the next night only to find myself allocated again to the same patient. What came next left me absolutely speechless, but also turned out to be a blessing in disguise. After I received handover from my colleague from the day shift, I was told that by 10 p.m. life support would be withdrawn and the 62-year-old patient was to be extubated. Extubation means the removal of the breathing tube. I felt at the time like somebody was kicking me in my guts. I knew that this patient was very sick with a very poor prognosis, and I knew that his chances for survival were very slim with such a massive bleed on his brain. Apparently, the ICU team had a meeting with the family during the daytime, and the family was told that life support would be withdrawn at 10 p.m. tonight because it was, quote unquote, in the best interest of the patient. The family wasn't asked what they thought was, quote unquote, in the best interest for their loved one. One thing that I vividly remember was that I knew the family wasn't ready for this. They knew and understood how sick their loved one was, but they were nowhere emotionally ready to let go. As my colleague finished handover, the doctors passed by and did their ward round, and the ICU consultant said to me, by 10 p.m. you'll be extubating this man. I looked him in the eye and I said, if you want to extubate this man by 10 p.m, you can do it yourself, because I'm not going to do it. He asked me if I was refusing to follow orders, and I said to him, that's exactly what I'm doing. I said to the ICU consultant that the family was nowhere near to be ready to let go, and following his orders felt like following an order for an execution. He looked at me and had nothing more to say. I immediately went to the nurse in charge and reported to her about my serious concerns, and also made very clear that I wasn't going to follow those, what I considered, diabolical orders, and that anything that was happening here was going against my moral and ethical values and beliefs. I made very clear that if the family wasn't involved in this decision-making process, that I would refuse to look after this patient and either go home right here and then, or they would have to reallocate me to another patient. On top of all of that, the family were waiting for their loved one's brother to fly in from overseas. When the doctors as well as the nurse in charge realized that I was dead serious about what I was and what I wasn't prepared to do, they actually started to listen. And I said to them and the family that another family meeting needs to be held before any major decisions will be made. Lo and behold, another family meeting was held that night with another ICU consultant who was willing to give the family more time to come to terms with things, and also made sure that all family members were there, including family members coming from overseas. Most ICUs are pretty poor when it comes to end-of-life care. This one was a disaster, and I have witnessed many poorly planned and poorly executed end-of-life situations. But this was extraordinary poorly executed, and I was determined to stop the way the ICU team went about it. The patient passed away about 48 hours after this debacle, but only after the family was given the opportunity to make an informed decisions, have some peace of mind, a sense of control, power, and influence. After that, I wrote a long email to nurse management in how disappointed I was to find myself in such a poorly planned end-of-life situation that caused a lot of stress for all parties involved. But I also knew that after this incident and after many other similar incidents that I witnessed over the years, that it's time to act and start something where families in intensive care can have a voice, will be heard, and also get an idea of what's often really happening in intensive care. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one, make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision-making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle, and vulnerability, even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also check out our Your Questions Answered section, where I answer your questions, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Or you can call me, find international phone numbers on the Contacts tab. Also, check out our ebook section, where you get more ebooks, videos, and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one counseling and consulting with me via Skype, over the phone, and via email by clicking on the email and phone counseling tabs on the top of the website. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.